Hi everybody and welcome to another lesson of our Python Basics course. In this lesson we are going to talk about something called variables, and variables are really central to programming. You're going to see them all over the place. They're really one of the main concepts that you're going to use if you're going to write any code or going to understand any piece of code. And yeah, one thing I would say, I'm going to explain to you what variables are, how they work, how to use them, but like with most things that we've been looking at so far and that we will be looking at for a few more lessons, they will only make real contextual sense once you see them in different contexts, like different pieces of code you read or a piece of code that you try to write. So I can explain to you each single bit, but I think you should have some faith that these individual bits that we are looking at right now, like strings, built-in functions, variables, that they will sort of come together in a larger sense once you sort of see a few more examples of actual programs. Now, on to variables. Variables are essentially containers for things, or rather that's how you can think about them in practical terms. Now, you may remember when you want to create a string in Python, we use the quotation marks, double or single, and I know the standard one is hello world, or whichever characters you want to put in there. Now if you want to create a variable, however, you don't need these quotation marks. You just come up with a word like the name of your variable. It's called naming a variable. So let's say we want to create a variable and let's call it my city. And now I'm going to show you how you actually assign something to this container that a variable sort of is in a practical way. And it's one of those things that's easier shown than explained in words. Now here you can see this is an example of creating a variable and putting something into it, which is essentially really what you want to do with variables. They are containers for things, you have to assign something to them. So we came up with a variable name, my city, we followed with an equal sign, and then we followed with a string here, string London, or here could be anything that you want to assign to this variable, right? So any string, and some of the other things that we're going to see in the next lessons, but anything that you want to assign to this variable, like let's say my city, I mean it will be London. And now what this piece of code does is it assigns the string London that's to the right of this equal sign to the variable that we've come up with. And that's essentially done by this equal sign, which in programming, is referred to as the assignment operator. So this equal sign actually does something. It takes what's to the right of it, the string London, and assigns it to the variable to the left of it, variable my city. And now what this means in practical terms is that for the entire rest of the program we can pretend that whatever that we've assigned to our variable is in that variable. So if we now write something like this, for example, print my city, it will print out, well, let's see it will print out London, and that's line 6 being executed here, because the string London is in my city now, which means if we print my city, it is analogous to this, because London is in our my city variable. That's the fundamental idea of variables. You come up with a variable name, use the equal sign after it, then you follow with what you want to put into that variable, which allows you for the rest of the program to pretend as if what you assigned to it is in that variable. If I say it's in this variable, it's not actually technically very precise. It's just a practical way of thinking about that. On a technical level, what happens is an assignment, so there's a connection between two things. But for our practical purpose, you can think of variables as containers in which you put things. Because we've assigned a string to our myCity variable, we can print it out, but we can also do the other things that you can do with strings. So as you possibly remember, like we saw like a string function, like let's say upper, And because my city holds a string, we can do the same to it. So if we print this out, that should print the string London, all in uppercase, because we call this string function on it, and print it out. Here we see, that's line 7 being executed. And you know, you can do essentially all things that you could do with a string. You can do to this variable because it holds a string. So I know, let's say we wanted to replace the L with an M. Print this out, and that would print London. Yes, just to show you maybe one more example, maybe you remember the built-in function called len, which, you know, if we wrote this, that would give us the length of this string. And if we pass in the variable here, it would be as if we passed in that string that has been assigned to the variable, and will print out, what would it be? It would be 6, no? Yeah, so I've shown you more examples than are actually necessary to illustrate the idea. It's just so you can sort of get used to it a little bit more than if I just showed you one example. Now, yeah, so when you come up with this name for your variable in the first place, like in our case, my city, what you are doing is sort of you're giving your variable a name, right? And there are some sort of guidelines for giving good variable names. So one general guideline is that the name should be descriptive. So my city, for example, could be a reasonable variable name. That obviously depends on the program that you're writing and what piece of data is doing what. But my city could make sense in the context of a certain program. Or let's say you write some script to process the results of a game, and you want to keep track of a high score, and you possibly call that variable high score. I'm just saying you could call it something generic. You could call it var for variable, but that wouldn't tell anybody what piece of information you've assigned to it, which would make it hard to use later on in your program. So that's the one sort of general rule, and good variable naming is actually one of the sort of characteristics of a good programmer too. Right, there are some so-called conventions in different programming languages, which are things that which are not things that you technically need to do for the computer to understand your program, but which are commonly accepted within the programming community and almost in a cultural way. So to give you two examples here, one convention in Python is that you give your variable name sort of in lowercase letters. So this, for example, would work just as well. Like, the computer doesn't care about that. It's a legitimate thing to write, but that's just not the culturally accepted thing in Python programs. Now, there are exceptions when you use uppercase things, but if you're just starting out, I think you should just remember, use lowercase letters. The other thing is, any variable needs to be a continuous sequence of characters, right? And which means if you want to create a variable name that has more than one word, like my name or my city, you can't write a white space here, because that white space would make it two variables directly after each other. That doesn't make sense in Python, because the white space indicates that a new thing is going to happen. So this is one variable, my, another name, and that won't work. You know, you see here some protest by Python if we execute the program. So the way that you deal with that is, if you want to make a variable name of more than one word, is underscores. And that is also a Python convention. Different languages have different norms here. I, for my part, quite like this Python convention of like using underscores and lowercase letters. It makes for quite clean looking, in my personal opinion, clean looking code in the end. Yeah, so that's definitely one thing to remember. Of course, when you look at real programs, there will usually be more than one variable. So maybe you have my city, my name, and my age, and then whatever, however old you are. So point being, if it comes to real programs, you usually have a bunch of variables that keep track of different things. I think there's one other thing to mention, that variables can be overridden during the course of the program. So here we assign the string London to the my city variable, and that's how it's being, and that's sort of dictates how the program executes in the following lines. But we could write this, like let's say at some point we change our taste in cities and now Paris is our favorite. Now we have the same variable name here and we assign something else to it. Now Paris, the string Paris is in the my city variable, has been overridden, which means from now on, if you now print this my city variable, it will print out Paris. So from line 3 to line 10, London is in it, and that's why all these things come out as they come out. But if we override the existing variable with a different thing, it will just hold the new, whatever you've newly assigned to it. And you can also do this as often as you like. You can go all crazy. But the idea being is that variables can change what they hold over the course of a program execution. That's the really important idea to get right. Right, so I believe in the next lesson I'll try to show you a few examples, like putting together the things we've seen so far, strings, built-in functions, variables, so that you can start to see these components in a cohesive way in a context. Relating back to what I said earlier, that in order to actually understand these things for real, you have to see them in use in certain environments. Right, I hope this is helpful, and yeah, as I also said, don't expect these things to make perfect sense on the first go. Like totally expect to look at them maybe 2 or 3 times, and you will become very acquainted to them, and they will become familiar over time. Right, I think that should be it for this lesson, and see you in the next one. Bye bye.